Hello, everyone, and welcome to Jump In with Jumi here on blackdoctor.org. I'm your host, Jumi, and I'm so happy that you all are here today because we have another incredible episode in store for you today. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and to bring awareness to that, this week's episode is all about sexual assault, how to prevent it, and how to put an end to sexual violence in our communities. You know, when most people think about sexual assault, they think about themselves, walking down the sidewalk or jogging, and then some person jumping out of some janky alley ready to attack. But, that's not really the case. When it comes to sexual assault, of women that are assaulted, 51% of them are assaulted by an intimate partner. 40% of them are assaulted by an acquaintance. When we're talking about Black women, 75% of Black women that are assaulted by somebody that they know, a friend or a family member. And on top of the fact that this is such a common issue, many people don't report it. If there are 15 Black women that, are assaulted sexually, only one of them are going to report their sexual assault. So as you can see, this is a very important issue, and it's something that I'm very happy to bring to the forefront of conversation because we need to talk about it. This episode is for everybody. It's for anybody, who is a survivor. It's for anybody who wants to support sexual assault victims. It's for anybody who wants to learn. It's to learn more about the prevention, to learn to really put an end to sexual assault in our communities. Knowing these statistics, we really do need to have this important conversation. And I'm really glad that you're joining me today. Given that this is a sensitive subject, if you have comments or questions, but you don't really want to put them out there, I encourage you to email me. My email address is below, jumpinwithjumi@gmail.com. Definitely put in email any questions that you might have that you might not feel comfortable putting in the chat. But if you are comfortable, talking about your story or, letting us know that somebody that has been assaulted, that has been a victim, go ahead and put it in the chat and let's have a really engaging conversation today. And let's learn how to prevent and put an end to this major public health issue. So once again, thank you for joining me. Make sure that you are sharing this with people because everybody needs to know about this incredibly important topic. With that, let's get right into the conversation. We're going to start today's conversation hearing from a survivor who is now the CEO and president of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Miss Ruth M. Glenn. Ruth has worked and volunteered in the domestic violence field for over 27 years. She has served on many domestic violence programs and funding boards, provided hundreds of presentations on domestic violence victimization and survival, and has testified before the Colorado State Legislature and the United States Congress and provided consultation, training, and technical assistance on local and national levels for victim survivor issues. Let's welcome Miss Ruth Glenn.
How are you? I'm doing well, Jumi. How are you? Thank you so much for the intro.
Thank you for jumping in with us today. I know that you tell your story, and that really helps other people. And so start with, telling us a little bit about you and your story when it comes to domestic violence.
Okay. So I do want to preface it by saying that we're taught, for me, domestic violence is my primary issue and topic and what I talk about. But it's very important that we talk about domestic violence and sexual assault together. Sexual assault is one of the elements of domestic violence and vice versa. So just to put that out there before we jump into a couple of minutes about my story. And I found my prince when I was 16 years old. I married him when I was 19. And the moment that we got married began 13 years of sometimes pretty violent physical violence. But to be clear, the 13 years was also filled with other types of violence and certainly sexual violence. There was financial abuse, there was emotional abuse, the list went on and on. When I determined that I was going to leave, it was because someone reached out to me and said, I think something's happening for you. When you're ready, I'm here for you. It still took me another 2 years to be able to leave with my son. So I just really think that that's important to say and put out there. When I left 8 months later, 8 months, I want that to be something that you remember. 8 months later, he found me, shot me 3 times and left me for dead. I want to let you know that physically, and particularly as we're talking about health issues, there was no lasting physical injuries, but the PTSD and the other things that I've dealt with over the past 25 to 30 years certainly have impacted my life, not in bad ways always, but people always ask me, how are you doing? And I say, do you think I'm 100%? And they'll say, yeah, you look 100%. Well, no, because the types of abuse that I endured are things that stick with you. But with all of that said.
Uh-oh, I think we lost her. Okay, we might have lost her, but I think she's going to rejoin. But yeah, she was talking about, that was Ruth Glenn, and she's the CEO of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And she was telling us her story about how she has dealt personally with domestic violence and how it took her a little bit of time to leave her abuser, but she also had a young child. And so we're going to get her back on so she can continue to tell her story about what she was telling us. But with that, I do want to continue the conversation and maybe start to talk a little bit more about sexual assault and what we can do as a community to really start to heal from it and prevent it. So I want to bring up our other panelists. One of them is Bianca, and she's a community educator in California, and she works with the Standing to End Sexual Assault in Southern California. And then we've also got Sonia Parker Good, who is in Dallas, and she is a director of outreach and prevention. And we have got Miss Glenn back. So let's bring her back up and add her back to the stream so we can continue to have a conversation.
Oh, my apologies. I'm not sure what happened.
It's okay.
Away.
It's okay. If you wanted to continue to
okay.
What you were saying.
Yeah, just a couple more minutes. I think I was headed towards, though the story, is tragic, and I could say that because it's my story. I do want people to understand, and particularly when we are talking with other survivors and victims of domestic violence, that there's light on the other side. It takes a while. You figure out how to get it done. You reach out to the resources, which our other panelists and folks will talk about. I went back to school, got my 2 degrees. Worked for an agency for 28 years, retired, and then took this job 6 years ago. So anything is possible. So we want to make sure that we remind victims and survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence, and again, usually they go hand in hand, that there's something on the other side. So that's pretty much what I wanted to make sure that we discussed.
I love that. So, oftentimes when you hear people talking about domestic violence and sexual assault, they're just like, oh, well, why don't you just leave? What is it that stops people from leaving? What are the things that you see? And what did you experience?
I couldn't hear your question.
So what are some of the things that you experience when it comes to them saying, okay, why don't you just leave? What is happening? If they're doing this, why don't you just walk away from it? Why is it so difficult for victims of sexual assault and domestic violence to walk away from their abusers?
Well, from my perspective, and I'm sure our other panelists have a perspective as well, I did. I walked away. And 8 months later, he found me. Mm-hmm. We have to be very, very careful. When we're saying that. What we should say is, if you have any needs, I'm here for you. When you make up your own mind about when you think it is safe, we're here for you to make sure that you have the safe journey.
Mm-hmm. So what have you seen when it comes to the pandemic and its increases in sexual assault and domestic violence? I would love for you, Ruth, and Bianca and Sonia to chime into this, but I'll start with you, Ruth. What have you seen?
It's been a huge increase on 3 different prongs from our perspective. We just conducted our member survey. One is that, of course, domestic violence programs are at capacity because they've had to redo their infrastructure, and I'll just leave it as simple as that. It's really been stressed to make room because of social distancing and all of those things. The second thing is victims aren't leaving and or reporting for various and sundry reasons. They don't report most of the time anyway, but this has really prevented them from reporting because they're afraid to go out and get COVID, right? Mm-hmm. So do I deal with the fear at home or do I deal with the fear out there? Mm-hmm. And last but not least is we understand that abusers, perpetrators of this particular type of crime, where they hurt somebody they claim to care about, now have greater access to their sexual assault and domestic violence victims. So to put it in a nutshell, that's what we've seen.
That's what you've seen. Okay. And what about you, Bianca? Tell the viewers a little bit about you, your work, and, what you're seeing when it comes to the pandemic and sexual assault.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I do community education work. In my role, I go and I speak to middle school students, high school students, college students. I speak with parents, as well as just any adults in our community about sexual assault, bringing awareness to the issue, defining the issue, and also talking about what are the things that we need to challenge within our culture, within our society, our own beliefs, our own attitudes in order to prevent it. One of the biggest things is that just because there is limited opportunity for interaction in person, it doesn't mean that sexual assault has stopped. We also educate on the different forms of sexual assault. People think that sexual assault is just physical contact. It's just groping. It's just caressing, unwanted groping or caressing. But it adapts online as well. We know that online sexual harassment is an issue as well. People who are receiving explicit comments on social media, if it's unsolicited pictures through text. So I think that's part of the education piece of, it's not always just physical touching. And I think Ruth made a really good point of they're at home. Folks are at home. Sometimes their perpetrator is someone that's close to them. It's a family member. It's a partner. It's someone who lives on their floor. It's a roommate, whatever it may be. There's access there. There's higher access there. Mm-hmm. So that's what we tend to see, sexual assault still occurring during the pandemic.
Absolutely. And what about you, Sonia? You're in Dallas and you work with the Rape Crisis Center. So what do you see when it comes to the pandemic and its effect on the people that are coming to see you all at your center?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, first of all, for having me here today. We are definitely seeing an increase in sexual assault, even though it's a pandemic. I mean, right now we've been living in virtual everything, right? People are working from home, attending school from home, dating online more than ever before. And so we're definitely seeing more and more people talk about the sexual exploitation, that's actually happening online, these online spaces. And so our job, primarily I work with the outreach, prevention, and education team to go out into the community and to let people know and bring awareness to our youth and adults so that they will know more about what to look for, know more about differences between myths versus facts of sexual violence, to learn more about ways that we can actually prevent these strategies or these things from happening. This month, as you mentioned earlier, is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And the theme for this year, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, is creating safe survivor supporting online spaces. Mm-hmm. And how ironic, right, that we're talking about online spaces. So that the theme this year is very focused on how can we get people to be more safe online? How can we teach people to understand that these sexual behaviors and aggressions are happening online in light of everything that we've been living through this pandemic with?
Absolutely. So let's touch on that a little bit in terms of what does sexual assault look like and who is at risk for it? Like, what are some of these factors that we should be looking out for and we should be trying to modify across the age span? So Sonia, if you wanted to start with that.
Sure, I will. So sexual assault, is basically this umbrella term that kind of includes sexual activities like rape, fondling, attempted rape, stalking. There's just this big umbrella of terms that fall under that. And what was your second question? I'm sorry, you asked.
So what are some of the risk factors? Like, what are some of the things that people should be looking out for when it comes to preventing this from happening to themselves?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and now I remember you asked who's at risk.
Yes.
And that was a really, important question, because I definitely want to say that everyone is at risk for sexual assault. Right. There is no, sometimes people just like to attribute this to being, the situation that loose women who are wearing or dressing a certain way, things only happen to them, but it's not the truth. Every single person is at risk for sexual assault. And there's so many things, and I'm sure we'll get into talking about, ways that we can prevent it a little bit later, but just understanding, statistically, you talked about it earlier, that our numbers are very high. The number is 73, if every 73 seconds a sexual assault is occurring. That's too much, right? And you think about the time frame in this hour, that's a one person every minute or so, almost a minute or so being sexually assaulted. So we have to have these conversations more often than what we're doing, so that we can find ways to really come together as a community and as a society to end this epidemic.
Right, for sure. Now it's so important to understand, because it's just like it's happening so often, yet we're not having the conversations enough. So what is it going to take for people to really get comfortable having the conversations like we're doing today in spaces like this, but amongst themselves and amongst people that, need to stop, perpetuating this issue? If you want to go ahead and start with that, Sonia.
Yeah, I will. I'll say, just by doing exactly what we're doing here today, by having the conversation, right? I think people need to be more comfortable, number one, with acknowledging that sexual violence is a problem. A lot of times when I remember when I first started working for Darcy, there were so many people that were really shocked, when I said to them that I worked for a rape crisis center. And it was like this weird, kind of space of, you work where? Why do you work there? I remember going to outreach events where women would walk past the table and they would literally look at our table and event and say words like, oh, that doesn't happen to me. That doesn't apply to me. So always trying to, get people to understand that if you've been fortunate enough to not be a victim of sexual violence, I can almost promise you that someone that has been. And so being able to acknowledge that this is a real issue that is affecting our communities, I think that's how we're going to get people more comfortable talking about it. It just doesn't happen, in the movies. This is not something, as you said, we're jogging along the beach, somebody jumps out of a bush, This acquaintance rate is very real. Over 80% of people who are sexually assaulted by someone they know. So getting this information out into the community and having more and more dialogues, I think that's how people are going to start to get more comfortable. So I'll say that I've worked, just working for Darcy for the last 3 years. More and more people have come out to me, have come forward, have disclosed, and and again, I say everyone can be a safe space.
Yes.
Every one of us can be a safe space.
Which is why these conversations are so important, because we're getting the comfort level of like, okay, we can do this, we can address this. We know that everybody's at risk. We know that not everybody, it's not the thing of jumping out, but it's like, hey, it's the person right next to you that you top it up with on a regular basis that could turn and do something, but having the conversations. So I know that there is a difference between sexual assault and domestic violence, but what is the intersection, Ruth? Like, where does it start and stop? What is it about the two?
Well, so first of all, I do want to remark on, how do we make sure that we keep talking about it? Because I'm a firm believer that we also listen to survivors' voices. We believe them first, and we let them, and we support them in raising their voices really loud. Because we're a society that doesn't believe it unless we're hearing from somebody that's experienced it. I could talk on for days.
Right.
But listen to survivors' voices. So the intersection is really interesting. And from my experience and what I know, and I'm sure the other ladies may have some other pieces that they'd like to add. But domestic violence is about power and control, right? It's not about anger. It's not about I had a bad day. It's not about that I use substances, illegal substances and legal substances. It's about power and control. And particularly, even though we know that men are sometimes victims, but particularly when you have a woman who's a victim and that man wants to maintain control, what better way than to commit sexual violence? You will have sex with me, whether you like it or not. You're my partner, you're my wife, you're my whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Quite frankly, we also hear about that in gay relationships quite frequently. When there's domestic violence, there's the sexual violence.
Mm-hmm.
It's why we have marital rape laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
Guarantee you, if you went back and looked at any of those convicted of marital rape, you would see that they have a pattern in history of other types of domestic violence. That's not to say that sexual assault doesn't happen in other ways.
Right.
When we're talking about that intersection, we're talking about, and sex is also a control tool, a power tool. So when you combine those two, and someone has that kind of control over you, it's a definite intersection. I've been a part of survivors speaking and hearing from them, and almost every last one of them, as domestic violence survivors and identifying themselves that way, have revealed that there was some element of sexual assault or sexual violence in that relationship.
And that's that's just hard to hear, because it's just like you don't want that to be the case, but it's happening, and it's happening very frequently.
Right.
And so, were you saying something, Ruth?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
So what is it going to take for people, like if we know people that have been sexually assaulted, or we want to help people, and we just want to put an end to this, what are some things that we can do in addition to these conversations? Like if somebody was to say to us, I have been a victim of this and I am looking for some help, what are some things that you all suggest, or what do you do when people come to you? So Bianca, if you wanted to start with that, because you are working in the community with parents and with, grandparents of these younger age children, what is it that you're telling them to do?
Yeah, so the way we break it down with folks, the way that we have this conversation is believe, listen, and support. So we understand that the narrative around sexual assault is that oftentimes people place a lot of responsibility on survivors to prove their sexual assault, where they're like, well, prove it, or tell me what happened, things like that. And sometimes the first step is letting someone know, we believe you, I believe you, and they need to hear that. And that really affects their healing process from then on, because if they go to a loved one and a loved one doesn't believe them, they're like, okay, well, who's going to believe me? Who do I turn to for support? The other piece is listening and being intent, like having intent with your listening and not pushing for details, because oftentimes they're not ready to share more details. And then just offering support, offering resources. And oftentimes, and when I speak with youth, I give them this information of oftentimes we feel like we have to tell someone, oh, we have to go to the police. Oh, we have to tell a parent, we have to tell an adult. But that may not be what the survivor wants, and it may not be what they need at the moment. It may be more harmful for them to disclose what happened to them. So really the best way to support is giving them resources, and also asking, how can I be of support to you in this moment? What do you need from me? And respecting their privacy, because sometimes sharing that information with someone else could end up being more harmful for them in the long run.
What is it that they need? So if somebody says, if we're asking, what do you need? What is normally their response?
Well, it could be from, I just need you to listen to me in this moment, to, you know what, I need to call a hotline right now, a confidential hotline. I need to find someone that someplace I can receive counseling. Maybe they choose to go to law enforcement, maybe they don't. So it really varies from survivor to survivor and what they feel they need in that moment. And that's the empowerment piece, because how Ruth was saying of power and control, oftentimes when sexual assault occurs, the person feels disempowered. They feel like they had no control over their body, no control over the situation that occurred. So we're instilling that empowerment of, you get to choose now what you want for yourself, how you want to heal, what kind of support you need at this moment.
There's a really good question that just came up, and it's about protective orders. And it's like, how helpful are these orders in abusive situations?
So there's a couple of things. I want to just jump on what Bianca said. Always make sure that you have a resource available, because I promise you, somebody in your circle that something is happening, right? Have the hotline number available. Have an idea of how you might help them, because when they jump off that cliff to say, I'm going to talk to Bianca about this, we need to be there to catch them.
Catch them for sure, yes.
Right. So really briefly about protection orders. I got shot under a protection order. Yeah. He called me when it got delivered and said, it won't stop a bullet. So now I want us to be very careful about protection orders. I firmly believe that you should get a protection order if it's safe and you have support of advocates, community advocates, and system advocates. And that's a lot more information that we have time to share today. So it's important for documentation, but we never want a victim or survivor of either domestic violence or sexual assault to ever think that that's going to protect them. Every jurisdiction responds a little bit differently to a protection order. For instance, a protection order can definitely escalate violence. So in other words, how dare you, because now you're disempowering me even more. So we have to be really careful with protection orders, but I do advocate that a victim or survivor should get a protection order with the appropriate and proper support to get a protection order.
So I want to follow up on that. What does that appropriate support look like with the protection order? Because we think that, protection orders and we're good, but you're saying that's not enough. So what other elements do we need to make sure that that is enough?
Right. So I think first of all, like I said, I could give a seminar in it. Not really, because I'm not quite that good. But it really does depend on the victim survivor, right? What are the elements of risk that she or he may be up against? What kind of services and support and resources does she have? Can she get out of that city, state, and get somewhere else so we don't have to worry about that 100 feet or whatever it might be? Does she have the ability to get to shelter if she needs to really quickly? Or does she want to go to shelter now so she can figure out how to get her kids back and forth to school, how to get the aid that she might need, how to talk to her employer so she can make sure the employer knows that she has a protection order? And, the list goes on and on and on. This is the other reason why it's difficult to leave. When you think about leaving, imagine all of this stuff you have to think about. So then you add a protection order to it that if you're under the impression that that's going to fix it for you, it can become really problematic. But foremost, what I would say is make sure you have a community advocate who you can reach out to at a community domestic violence program or a community sexual assault program who can help guide you to make sure you're safe. They'll assess your risk with you. And then you have also a system advocate, and whether that's through law enforcement or the DA, they have a very different role, but to know you have a PO.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Sonia, what about you? What is your suggestions when it comes to developing that, robust community of resources plus a protection order?
Well, I know at Darcy, we have a legal advocate that, kind of helps support survivors in that if that's something that they're interested in obtaining. As far as other resources, I agree wholeheartedly. Just making sure that you have that crisis hotline information available with you, making sure I always tell people to educate yourself, on this issue. Again, it is so prevalent. And honestly, things are changing, every day. When people ask about, sexual assault, sexual harassment, depending on, from state to state, the legal side of all of these things, can change depending on what state you're in. So I always remind people to, just try to stay up on, educating yourself and make sure you understand, what's relevant in the community and in the state that you live in.
Okay. And what about you, Bianca?
I think I'm going to end up saying what was already said, but I think the way that we at Standing Together to End Sexual Assault, when we approach or when a survivor approaches us for support, it's really having those strong connections to other community partners, because we know that it's not just sexual assault they're dealing with many other issues at the same time, caused by the sexual assault, caused by trauma they experienced before, caused by housing insecurity, whatever it may be. So where our scope of work ends, we know that we can reach out to someone else who can step in with their programming and say, we can offer support for that. So it's really having that network of connections, of support. And yeah, it's really, as community members, also being informed, which was mentioned of, oh, I have a flyer. And it's funny that Sonia brought that up, where people walk by our tabling events sometimes. And I've had, I remember very clearly, it was a man who walked by and he said, oh, you only provide support for the ladies, right? This isn't for me. And I was like, well, no, first of all, but also it's like, what if you do need this number for someone at one point? So it's really just ensuring that you have the accurate information.
For sure. Well, I love the fact that you brought up the fact that there's a need for a network. There's a need for more resources. There's a need for people to have all these different individuals to reach out to. So I'm really excited that I've got another set of panelists who are part of this network, who, are part of the clinical team, the legal team that can help you when you are going through this entire situation of sexual assault. And so I will bring you ladies back up for our Q&A a little bit later, but now I would like to bring up our next set of panelists who are going to talk to us more about the clinical side and the legal side of dealing with sexual assault and domestic violence. So ladies, I will see you all in a second, and I would like to bring up these next folks. I've got some great more panelists for you all, so hold on. All right, so we are going to bring up Miss Karen Carroll, who is a nurse. She is a sexual assault nurse examiner. We're also going to bring up Dr. Lauren Collins, who is a physical therapist, but who, is a women's health physical therapist who deals with sexual assault survivors. And then we also have Alejandra Thorpe, who is she's a lawyer who deals with domestic violence assault patients in California. So let's welcome Alejandra. Let us welcome Dr. Lauren Collins, and let us welcome Karen Carroll. Welcome to the show, ladies. Thank you for jumping in with me today. How are you all doing?
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Amazing. I'm super excited that you all are here, because the work that you do is so important to making sure that victims and survivors are, they're really taken care of, and they have the entire network of community members that can help them deal with what they're going through. So Karen, if you wanted to start by telling us a little bit about you and your work as a SANE nurse and what that is, and your forensic nursing experience.
Well, I think this is a perfect segue, because as I was listening to your previous presenters, I was one of those persons they were talking about. Back in 1994, I was tied, gagged, and raped at knife point in the bedroom of my own home by my then husband. Now, this happened because 3 weeks earlier, we had gotten into an argument, and he had pulled a knife on me. Now, I had been an emergency room nurse for several years. I knew all the right things to do. I knew what it meant to be in an intimate partner violence situation, although I didn't consider my relationship one of those. But I also knew if a man is angry enough to pull a knife on you during an argument, then you're not safe and you need to get away. So I was able to get out of the house that evening. I went to family court the next day. I got this order of protection. I did everything that I would normally counsel patients to do. And the judge, upon hearing my story, said that my husband had to be removed from the home. So the police came to the house and they escorted him out. And I went on with my life, thought I was safe. Approximately 3 weeks later, I woke up, and when I opened my bedroom door, my husband was standing on the other side of the door. He was naked, except for a pair of plaid boxer shorts. In one hand was a knife, and in another hand were 2 ropes. I was tied to my bed frame with ropes and pantyhose. I was gagged, and he raped me at knife point. What I remember thinking during the assault was, I have to stay awake. I have to watch everything, because nobody's going to believe me. Luckily, I did survive it, and he did escape, and he was out in the community for about 6 weeks. He eventually was caught. We did subsequently go through a trial, and he was convicted. Now, I have to say, I was nervous about going to court to testify, but I was fortunate enough to be given a number of our local rape crisis program. And I met with a counselor, and they gave me the strength and the courage to go forward and to prosecute this. Now, you need to understand that in 1994, this was only the second marital rape case that was ever prosecuted in my county. And I believe the first one ended in acquittal. So there were a lot of issues there. And a lot of people still, even to this day, don't believe that husbands can rape wives, but they can. So I did survive and the assault. And the thing that happened to me, I think that changed my life even more than the assault, was what happened to me when I went to the hospital. At the time, I was the nurse manager of a local emergency department, and I chose not to go to the hospital where I worked. I went to a different hospital where the physician did not know how to perform evidence collection, never even addressed me by name, didn't even look at me. And I just said to him, well, listen, doc, I'm a nurse. If you let me, I can help you with this. And lucky for me, I was able to walk him through my own evidence collection. And 3 years after that, I found out that my county was going to start this fabulous program where they were going to train registered nurses to provide care to these very special women who had the courage to show up at a hospital after a rape or a sexual assault seeking medical care. And I figured, well, if I can show the doctor how to do mine, I can learn to do someone else's. And I got trained, and I have been a forensic nurse now for over 20 years. And it's my life's goal that when you get the courage to respond to a hospital emergency department, that the people that are there to take care of you know how to do this very important exam. So I do a lot of training and a lot of work, not only with survivors of sexual violence, but with healthcare providers to make sure that they understand that you need to be compassionate. This care needs to be trauma informed. This is the one time where you believe what your patient tells you, and you offer choices, and you offer all types of options. You respect that patient's choice, and you give them the best care that they can get. And research has shown that if the first contact with a responder who is compassionate, who believes, and who empowers that survivor, then they're more likely to go forward with the remainder of the process, be it law enforcement, legal services, or whatever. But it's really important, and I want to be sure that women who know that if you or someone you care about is raped or sexually assaulted, we want them to seek medical care immediately at a facility that has trained sexual assault nurse examiners.
So how do they know though? Like the first thing is we're so used to going to medical facilities and sometimes not getting the kind of care that we want. Not to speak of when something like this happens, we don't want to go and just be disrespected or disregarded. So how can we feel comfortable going to a medical facility? Do all facilities have sane nurses that are empathetic to their situations? What is a way that you can encourage people to go and get medical treatment? And what are some consequences of not getting medical treatment?
I wish I could sit here and tell you that every hospital has access to trained examiners. They don't. But if you have the name of a local rape crisis program in your community, even a domestic violence program in your community, they often have their finger on the pulse of what type of services are available within your state or within your community. I'm originally from the state of New York, and we have a amazing organization in New York City that has their pulse and their finger on all types of services that are available around the 5 boroughs. We have a statewide sexual violence coalition. We have a domestic violence coalition. So these types of places will have information on examiner programs. You can go in and you can Google sexual assault nurse examiner programs in your state, and you can try to find out where these facilities are located. But if you can get to a facility with a trained examiner, you are going to get the most amazing, compassionate, and trauma-informed care that you can get. We are there for the patient. We know about evidence collection. We know about injury and mechanism of injury. We can talk to them about medications, very important medications that can prevent sexually transmitted infections, that can prevent pregnancy, and that can even possibly prevent HIV as a result of this contact. But the most important thing I want the community to understand, that when someone is raped or sexually assaulted, their body is touched without their permission. And if they can get to a facility that has a trained forensic nurse examiner, we can begin the healing process right immediately at that point, because we know that you need to feel, if you're the survivor, like you are now in control. just very simply by the way we talk to you, even how we sit when we talk to you, and how we just turn back that control over to you. And we want you to come, whether you ever want to report this to the police or not. There are healthcare issues and items that we can address with you. So we want people to get to a hospital.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure that if people knew that they were going to come and have somebody as empathetic and as compassionate as you are, you know, there would be more people that would feel comfortable going and, you know, seeing a medical professional. But hopefully there will be more people that are trained. I want to now turn to you, Dr. Collins, because you have a very unique way of healing women who have dealt with sexual trauma. You know, you have a very trauma-informed approach. So talk to us about your work and what you do with victims of sexual assault.
Okay. So I just want to give you a little bit of backstory on how I came into this work, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I've been very blessed and fortunate. My mother's name is Umi Hankins, and so she co-founded an organization called IDVAC, the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community. So I grew up in an environment where I was taught, you know, about trauma-informed care, and I went to conferences, and I went to, you know, I went to shelters that she would work at. I worked the domestic violence shelters at the Y where she used to work. So it's been with me for so long, in that sense. And then I became, I'm a physical therapist, and I specialize in something called pelvic health. And so within that, and going to all these conferences with my mother, I was realizing how many things are being talked about in terms of legal issues, you know, living somewhere, financial situations, counseling, mental health counseling, but nothing was being talked about. What I was seeing in my practice every day, which was the physical dysfunctions that people were having as a result of being survivors of sexual assault or domestic violence. And so from that is kind of how I started coming into my work and specializing more and coming to present to the organizations that support survivors and supporting survivors themselves in their healing process. So that's kind of how I came into it and started my work. Oh, and I'm also speaking to Karen. Thank you so much for the work you do, Karen. I am also a trained first responder. And so I'm the person who kind of helps, I don't do it as much anymore because I'm doing all physical therapy, but I'm the person who helps on the advocacy part before they actually go in to see Karen. You know, if police are coming in trying to talk to a survivor or things like that, that would be my role. Or family was coming in, that would be my role to be the advocate there. So I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
And I definitely appreciate advocates. You are angels to me.
Yeah. This connection is so important because we need to see what the process is. You know, we need to see if somebody comes to us and say they've had some kind of issue, then we know that there's sexual assault first crisis responder who can then lead you to the nurse, who can then lead you to the legal aid. You know, there's an entire process that people can go through. And I think knowing this is going to help people be more comfortable with these conversations when it comes to, okay, how can we slow this crisis down? Because this is a major issue. So Lauren, you know, you do work with these women, physical therapy. How important is it for them to reconnect with their bodies? I know Karen touched on this a little bit. How important is it and how do you help them do that?
Oh, it's so important. A lot of my patients that I see come in with issues around not being able to tolerate a gynecological exam, not being because of pelvic pain at the vaginal opening, things like that. So they can't tolerate gynecological exam. They can't tolerate any kind of sexual intimacy. Maybe they have there's quite an overlap between people who have these types of issues with something called irritable bowel syndrome or interstitial cystitis or endometriosis, or fibromyalgia. There's a lot of overlapping with all these different diagnoses that come into play. And so just their quality of life has been significantly changed due to these incidences of sexual assault or domestic violence. And so to get them to reconnect to their bodies, that's a whole other thing too. Sometimes it won't just reconnect just going into touch. Like I may do an art project with them. I may have them start off, you know, doing an abstract kind of felt vulva if they're vulva owners, or an abstract kind of, you know, felt penis if they're penis owners, you know, whatever whatever it is, just doing something so they can have a loving intention around the part that they're disassociating from, or the part that of their body that they are no longer connected to. And then we can start into ways of touch and healing in that way. So it depends on where the person is. Most people come to me wanting to be able to do that and are willing to go into touch, but I also am very deliberate and very conscious around letting them know that it's a safe space and nothing occurs in the space that they do not want to, that they do not consent to. So we don't, if they only want to do external hip stretching, then we just start there, so it really, you have to meet the person where they are, and that's where I come from, and they have all power. And that's the other thing. As a healthcare provider, I think, I know we come from a place of privilege, right? And so as healthcare providers, we have to be willing to give that privilege up and say, you are in control of what is going to happen here. I don't control this, and so that's where I come from, and that's where all healthcare providers, quite honestly, should come from. But this is yours. This isn't mine. And we do how you want it to be done.
Right.
So those are some of the ways. And then, as Karen and the other panelists were saying before too, whenever I assess all my patients for histories of sexual assault or domestic violence, there's something on the written intake form, but I always ask everyone, because sometimes they don't want to disclose on a written form, or sometimes they don't, they don't want to, they don't know you yet, right? They haven't met you, so they don't know to trust you. And so I ask everyone, and I also understand that because my type of therapy is a very intimate kind of therapy, right? So it's important that they know that I know where they are, and that they know that they can trust me. And so we kind of just go from there.
That is, yeah. And I appreciate that, because it's more than just your typical, okay, let me run down some questions real quick. It's really just, like you said, meeting them where they are, making sure they're comfortable, because they're coming to you and they're already uncomfortable. And I think that's what we miss out in the typical, medical approach to dealing with pain and suffering, and so definitely touch on that again, but I do want to touch on the legal aspect of it. And so we've got Alejandra here, who is a lawyer in Los Angeles who works with domestic violence individuals. And so Alejandra, talk to us a little bit about, what are the legal rights of victims, and what's the role of the legal system when it comes to protecting us? So we've touched on protective orders a little bit, but what else is there, especially when it comes to victims who have children?
Thank you for having me, Jumi. So when it comes to your legal rights, and we're talking about sexual assault, it's really going to depend on whether or not you have a qualifying relationship. So in the case of a sexual assault of a friend or acquaintance, you're going to be filing a civil harassment restraining order. But once there is a qualifying relationship, so the sexual assault happened by like a husband, ex-partner, maybe a family member, that triggers the domestic violence restraining order. And these are orders that will protect the victims of sexual assault. But the big difference is that in the civil harassment restraining order, you're not going to get as much orders made by the judge, right? So in the case of a domestic violence restraining order, you're going to have more remedies. You're going to have more rights, because you're going to be asking for move out order. You're going to be asking for child custody. You're going to be asking for child support. And in the cases of people that are married, you could even ask for spousal support under the domestic violence restraining order. So these are orders of protection. And I know, there was a mention of whether or not these protective orders help, but I believe that they do. We see so many people. I work in the downtown LA courthouse, and I do see that these protective orders work. And I get people in the hallway in the court always, thanking me for helping them with, staying away from their abusers. Now, in the case of victims who have children with their abuser, the main the common issues that arise are both, you know, when we talk about victims staying away from like a supportive spouse, you know, who they're financially dependent upon. Um, that's a big issue. You know, women come to me and they're like, well, what about, am I going to get any child support? And what's great about the domestic violence restraining orders is that you can ask for child support. And that can be immediate. So the domestic violence restraining order is an absolute amazing tool, because while you would file an independent child support case, that may take a lot of time. And with COVID, it's even taking longer to get these cases heard. With a DVRO, the domestic violence restraining order, you could get that child support order in 3 weeks, which is, you know, it's very expedited. And you know, I basically assist women to submit all the paperwork so that they can get those orders in 3 weeks. As far as what we do in the courthouse is, you know, we just advocate for our client, the victim. We want to make sure that all the evidence is preserved. You know, we're talking about these rape kits. You know, we want to have that in order. We want to have a police report, an emergency protective order. Sometimes people, you know, they erase text messages, and the text messages can be like, I love you. And, you know, people come to me and they're like, oh, that's nothing. But sending a text like, I'm sorry, or I love you after the sexual assault, though all of these pieces of evidence can come in and be introduced in the courtroom. So save everything, save every communication, save those police reports, so that, you know, you can show up to court and have your best case. Now, many of these abusers deny everything that's alleged. So you want to make sure that you have the best and strongest case so that the judge will believe your side. And as far as, you know, us doing what we do, we have to advocate. We have to just advise our client to, you know, save and preserve this evidence.
Are there organizations like yours in every state associated with every like local courthouses, or how do they find legal aid like this?
So in Los Angeles, we have a wonderful, you know, organization right in the courthouses. So it's the Los Angeles County Bar Association's Domestic Violence Project. We have legal aid, and there's another organization called Betzedek, which helps elders in elder abuse cases. But I will tell you that during the pandemic, many of the self-help centers all over Los Angeles County have shut down. So we are helping, which before we only worked in the Central District, the downtown LA area. We're helping people in Lancaster and Long Beach. Like, these are districts so far out from us, but because of the pandemic, a lot of these little self-help centers in the courthouses have shut down. So we are seeing a rise in cases in our courthouse just because of, you know, lack of capacity in other courthouses.
Okay. So before we close out today, you know, this has been so encouraging, and I feel like the viewers have definitely gotten a very large view of how they can, you know, navigate this system. It's not really a standard system, but there is a system here, as we've seen. You've got the community level, we've got the clinical level, we've got the legal level. There's so many different things, and I feel like you all have given them so much information about how to navigate and how to have these conversations about preventing and ultimately stopping sexual violence in our communities. And so I do want to bring up our other panelists just so we can have this final conversation about, you know, what advice, what do you want to leave with the viewers today when it comes back to being comfortable talking about this, you know, preventing it in the future, and really being an advocate against sexual assault? So I am going to bring back, you know, Ruth. I'm going to bring back Sonia, and I'm going to bring back Bianca. And I want to give you all a chance to talk about what do you want to leave with the viewers today, just based off of what's happening when it comes to sexual assault. So Alejandra, if you wanted to start.
I'm sorry, What was your question?
I was saying, if you want to provide what information do you want to provide the viewers when it comes to like being comfortable reaching out when they've had issues with sexual assault, or if it comes to supporting others who have dealt with sexual assault and need some support?
My advice would be to listen, you know, offer support. I always advise my clients to gather like a female network of women that are going to be supportive, you know, a diverse group of women that are really going to be there for you to support you along this way, because it is an emotional, traumatic time in a woman's life. You know, men too, but just to have a network of women who can help you along this way. When you start this conversation, I guarantee you that women within your network are going to talk about their own domestic violence or sexual abuse, and you know, f- people sympathize, and when they see you falling, especially friends see you falling, you know, your group wants to pick you up. And so what I really recommend is for you to gather yourself a strong set of women who are really going to support you along this process.
Get your community of women. I love that. That is so important. So what about you, Dr. Collins? What advice do you have as a takeaway for our viewers today?
I think that my advice would be for those individuals who are like living in pain or living in dysfunction, that you don't have to live that way. You know, that there are people out here who want to help and who would love to, you know, see you live your best life. And then also understanding like survivors of childhood sexual assault and adult sexual assault, they present differently, right? And so there are going to be different ways that you want to help healing with those individuals. So that, and then also to understand that healing isn't just one thing. It's not just physical. It's not just spiritual. It's not just emotional. It's a combination of all those things. And so in order to have really to work on the complete healing aspect, to incorporate all of those things as much as you can, and not just focus on one thing, because it does have to come from all of it. So I think that would be my takeaway.
Thank you so much. And what about you, Bianca? What advice do you have?
I think my takeaway is in recognizing as individuals what role we play in ending sexual assault. Folks don't realize this, but sexual assault is a learned behavior. So it's definitely something that could be unlearned. And if we may not know a survivor directly, we're there present when we hear certain comments that blame survivors, or where we hear certain comments that objectify a certain group of people, or we may see, you know, street harassment happening, sexual harassment happening at work. So we all play a role in ending this, in challenging it and stepping in when we see it. And that's really the way to prevent sexual assault.
Thank you. And I'll go to you, Ruth. What is your advice and your takeaway for our viewers today? Oh, you're muted. Okay.
I this time. It's probably a bit more philosophical and something we don't talk about though, and particularly as women, right? We've got to learn to trust our intuition. That we're this high, we're taught that we shouldn't. You're too emotional, you're too hysterical, that's not real. No, he didn't touch you that way. All of those things, right? So I always encourage victims and survivors and those who want to support them to trust their intuition. And I would say that if you feel that something's not quite right with someone, and you think you know what it is, it's perfectly okay to just say simply, I am here for you if you ever need me. We don't need to talk about it right now, but I want to hug you today and let you know if you ever need to talk, I am here for you. And then I would say the same about victims and survivors. It's much more difficult when you've been sexually assaulted and domestic violently assaulted. I don't think that's a word, but I mean.
Today it is.
Today it is. I have chosen. But when you've been hurt by somebody you love, because remember, even in sexual assault, you usually know that person, right? somebody you know and love, or somebody that claims to care about you, it's a deep, deep wound. So trust your intuition about who can I talk to about this when and if I'm ready. So overall, just really trust your intuition.
Trust your intuition. That's powerful, and that's so important. And Sonia, I'll come to you, and then we'll end with Karen. Sonia, what's your some takeaways for our viewers today and those watching the replay? Oh, you're muted too.
Sorry. Here we go. So I think my first takeaway would address survivors. I'd want them to really know, first and foremost, that what happened to them is not their fault at all. That every human person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And I want them to acknowledge that healing is a process, and that, to give themselves a break and to, take that journey one day at a time. You can move from being a victim to a survivor, but it's a process. And on the other side, the takeaway that I would leave with our community of folks, whether we're advocates or just people, living in the community, is that we start to really work together to identify and address some of these social norms that are causing people to be at risk for not just being victims of sexual violence, but also being perpetrators for sexual violence. Far too often we focus on the victimization of people, and we don't do a lot of speaking to the perpetrators, those people who are actually out there committing these offensive acts. And so I would definitely challenge us as a community and a society to look at some of these systemic oppressions that's causing us or causing people to become perpetrators in the first place.
Thank you for pointing that out and bringing that up. I think that is a very necessary conversation to have and a very necessary way to look at this issue. For sure. And finally, Karen, what is some takeaways that you have for our viewers today?
I think for women and for the community at large, the word that comes to mind is believe. When someone has the courage to disclose or talk about any kind of gender-based violence, whether it be intimate partner violence, whether it be sexual violence, just believe. Believe that they're telling you the truth. And treat them with respect, and understand that there may be reasons why they might stay in an abusive relationship that you don't understand, but nobody knows better than that individual person how to keep themselves safe. So believe, be there for them to talk to, don't judge. Now, I want to focus on the healthcare community because we've got a long way to go. And if we believe, and if we really believe our patients and believe that they deserve the best care, then we need to make an effort to get these trained forensic examiners in every healthcare facility. It should never be the luck of the draw as to what hospital you go to, whether you receive adequate care. So if as a healthcare community, we believe that these patients need this good care, then we need to do whatever we need to do to make sure that more providers are trained and that more providers are available. And I want to thank all the ladies on this panel. You are all amazing. I mean, I'm just looking at the beautiful rainbow of color on this panel. And I think that women of color need to see us, and we need to be out in front, and we need to be speaking about these issues. I challenge fraternities, sororities, fraternal groups, religious groups. It has to be safe for people to talk about what's happening, because it's happening and it's in everybody's family and everybody's community. So if we keep that word believe up there, then that will change how we look at everything.
Absolutely. Well, I don't even need to end on that. Karen just took my ending.
Wonderful.
That was amazing. But just to follow up on that, I am, like Karen just said, I'm so grateful for all of you just being here and having this conversation in this place. And I feel like this is something that needs to continuously happen. And we need to be more comfortable, and we need to have more questions asked and answered. And we need to look at this issue from so many different angles and continue to build this network of support And like Karen said, believe people when they talk to you. Anybody watching today, if somebody is coming to you to talk about this, definitely believe them and listen to them and know that there's resources available to them. You know, we have all these women here that work in 6 different areas. That is a network of 6 people that can help you in your space. So my hope is that you all have found this information in this episode incredibly educational, incredibly empowering. And if you know people that might benefit, please do share it, because I don't know about you, but I haven't seen these kind of women come to a conversation about this important topic anywhere else. So
Right.
I definitely think there's a lot of people out there that will benefit from hearing these conversations, hearing this advice. And so thank you all. Thank you to my wonderful panelists today. I'm very grateful for you all. Hopefully we'll do this again soon and just continue this conversation. Everybody out there watching, I will be back again next week. Next week is Black Maternal Health Week. And so I've got 2 incredible episodes that are coming. So I'll see you on Tuesday and Thursday of next week. Same time, same place. Thank you all again. Definitely share this episode, and I will see you all next week. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, ladies.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.